to be here at Web Summit. In fact, it's great to make it to Web Summit after all the fog. You came over from Nice. Quicker to cycle here?
Sorry, say that again?
Quicker to cycle here from Nice than to catch a flight these days?
Thankfully, we didn't have any of the issues with the fog that a lot of people were caught up in, but yeah, weather was pretty good when I left.
Now, I think it's fair to say that whether we regularly hop on a bike, occasionally rent a city cycle bike, or just never pedaled anywhere, that we have enormous respect for athletes who spend 3 weeks in a very picturesque but grueling circuit. Endurance, determination, preparation, and teamwork all come into play, the very same factors that CEOs cite as the reasons behind their success. So you're this year's Tour de France winner, for those who might have been living under a rock and not aware that you actually won cycling's Grand Tour. There's a lot of pressure for you to return to the podium next year. How are you feeling about your preparation so far?
Yeah, really good. Well, at the moment, I'm in terrible condition. I've just taken, this is our month off, generally a month to 6 weeks, where it can just be normal again. You can have a burger, have a beer. But the rest of the year, I mean, from November onwards, it pretty much is 10 months of living very much full-on lifestyle to get ready for the Tour de France again.
So you've been slobbing out, having burgers, eating chocolate, that sort of thing?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's the 1 month where you can break the rules a little bit and just feel normal. I think it's only normal to have that reset at the end of every year.
Now, the history books are for and against you defending your title. Lance Armstrong, Alberto Contador, the last two riders to stand on the Tour podium in Paris in consecutive years, but they've had those victories stripped because of doping, which leaves Miguel Indurain in 1995, about a decade back since the last back-to-back win. What do you make of the odds?
Yeah, I mean, the bookies have got me down as the favorite already for next year's Tour. But I try not to think too much about the past. I try not to think too much about last year. I mean, it's been a fantastic season for me, winning the Tour de France. But I mean, the real challenge is going in and backing it up. I mean, I've won 2 tours now, but certainly after winning the Tour de France, it is harder to go back and do it again. You do have a lot more pressure on your shoulders. You're being pulled left and right over the winter doing different appearances. And I think a lot of the responsibility there, for me personally, is to try and limit the amount of engagements that I do have and try and focus on what I'm meant to do, which is riding my bike.
Let's get into some of the lessons that business people can learn from an elite athlete like yourself. We're here at Web Summit. There's a lot of startups who are going to be pedaling furiously to ensure they make it to the front of the pack. If they make it to stay on top, you're an endurance specialist. What advice do you have for those who have a long road ahead of them in business?
I think, I mean, for me right now, in my current form, looking at something like the Tour de France next year, I mean, it's quite a daunting goal. I mean, to be in that kind of form, to challenge for a Tour de France title, right now it feels like it's miles away and really quite unachievable. But I think to be able to set yourself smaller goals, objectives earlier on. So for me personally, I've got, once I get to January, I know I've got to go into a training camp with the rest of my teammates. I've got to be fit enough to be able to ride at least pretty competitively with them, and then to start racing in February, to have a few smaller goals before the Tour de France. I think it's always useful to be able to set yourself these smaller, more achievable goals.
What happens if you fall over at the first hurdle, the first goal you've set?
You've got to take those opportunities to be able to learn from. I mean, if I look back at the 2014 Tour de France, I'd won the Tour in 2013. I felt as if my preparations and everything had been perfect leading up until the 2014 Tour. The route suited me well, but in the first week, there was a touch of wheels in front of me, and just a careless moment, a careless crash, basically ended my Tour de France completely. And I think being able to pick yourself up from the disappointments and to be able to learn from them and just ask yourself the question, what could I have done better to avoid that situation certainly is useful going forward.
Let's talk about the type of circuit, the type of course you faced. If I could just paint a picture of this, 21 stages, 3,360 kilometres. There are 9 flat stages, which looks more appealing than the 3 hilly stages, the 7 mountainous stages, including 5 summit finishes. What was the toughest part about that course, and how did you mentally gear up for that challenge?
I think the toughest part of this year's Tour de France was the penultimate stage, a mountaintop finish on quite an iconic climb called the Alpe d'Huez. At that point, I'd gone into this year's Tour de France with the tactic of trying to get an early lead, to come into the race in very good condition, try and get an early lead on my rivals, and to basically fall back on a more defensive role going into the last week, and basically only having to do as much as them and try and match their performances. So by the time we'd got onto that penultimate stage with 19 days of racing in our legs already, I think everyone was pretty wrecked at that point. The toughest point really was defending the yellow jersey on that last stage, when I think my rivals could smell blood. They knew I was tired. They really just went for it and attacked me at every opportunity they had. And at that point, I really did fall back on my teammates and relied on their strength, basically, to carry me through the last moments of the race.
A lot of people think you did it pretty easily, but you say the course was not quite the one that you were best suited to, yet 2016 looks like it might be a better course for you. Why
Certainly.
is that, and is that even more mentally challenging if you think you might have an easier ride?
I think if I look at my strengths as a professional cyclist, I think I'm quite well-rounded. I'm able to time trial relatively well compared to the pure climbers who I'm up against in a lot of the Tour de France's. And this past Tour de France basically had 0 time trial kilometers. We had a prologue right at the beginning, but apart from that, there was no time trialing. Next year's course definitely does have a lot more time trialing, and does, in that sense, it's going to be a much more well-balanced race, and it's going to be that balance of who can hang on in the time trials and still climb at the top level. So it's going to take someone who can do a bit of everything to win next year's Tour.
So it's a big mental challenge that you face. Business leaders also face that day in, day out, particularly for a lot of startups here who might believe in their vision, but at that stage few others do. You've had injuries along the way, a fractured foot recently, I believe. What tips do you have for staying motivated?
I think motivation's an interesting topic. It's certainly, for me, I feel as if there are two ways of approaching it. One on the back of disappointment. Sure, in the moment, it's hugely frustrating, and you feel as if you've lost months of training and preparation have just gone straight out the window. But actually, those disappointments are fantastic. That's what picks me up. That's what motivates me to really. I go home and I analyze why things went wrong, and I really feel as if that gives me a lot of motivation. To come back even stronger the next opportunity I get. I think what's more tricky is coming in and trying to stay motivated and even trying to improve when things have gone well for you. I mean, I think it's quite easy to fall into that trap of becoming complacent. And okay, I've won the Tour de France. Well, I'll just go in next year and try and do the same thing again. It doesn't work like that. It's something I'm going to have to try and be better next year. I've got to look at everything I'm doing, every factor of my nutrition, my training, everything to be ready for the Tour de France, and try and do it even better than I have done in the past.
That must resonate with some of the big names in the room. We know there's been a lot of disruptors, and it can very quickly change a business model. What do you do when you have success, and how do you not deal with success? What tips do you have to those businesses about staying on top?
I think it's just that constant evaluation. You've got to look at. I don't think you're ever at the point where you've got the winning formula. I think, especially in cycling, everyone's evolving. The sport is evolving. You're coming up against stronger rivals every year. I certainly feel as if it's something I mean, we've won the Tour de France now 3 times in the last 6 years at Team Sky. So I mean, we've got a good basic formula for going into getting ready for the Tour de France, but I do feel as if it's something that we constantly need to challenge and constantly need to become better at everything we do.
How much of your success is physical preparation versus mental determination? Is it a 50-50 split, or is it skewed more one way than the other?
You certainly feel that in cycling, the physical demands are, of course, really important, but there becomes a stage where it turns mental. And when you're up on a final mountain pass, going head-to-head with one of your rivals, there does become that moment where you're going to push each other until one of you flicks a switch and says, right, that's enough for me. I can't keep the speed up any longer, and mentally makes that decision to back off. And that's where cycling really is up here. And you've got to be able to deal with someone pushing you above your capability, and to be able to hang on for as long as you can at that point.
Let me just probe you a little bit further about that, because teamwork is something that a lot of people in the room have to engage in to create successful businesses. You're part of British Team Sky. We know there are a lot of support riders, a big team effort behind the scenes. Can a rider with significant talent still win if the team is mediocre?
I'd say it would be a lot more difficult to win an event like the Tour de France if your team isn't completely up for it. Sure, it might be possible if you've got an exceptional leader. Might be possible for him to ride off other teams and still try and get to winning the race, but it certainly makes it a whole different game altogether. When you've got the backing of a really dependable, strong team, I mean, as I said earlier, on this year's penultimate stage, I really did fall back on my teammates, and arguably that's what won me the race.
It's very hard to pull together a good team. So what do you think the characteristics are of that winning team formula?
I think certainly one of the biggest aspects of a winning team is to align everyone's individual goals on the team with that of the team goal. And as soon as you get that coherence within the team, and you really get the buy-in 100% from everyone on that team to a common objective, you're going to have an unstoppable team at that point. You certainly see that things do go a lot more difficult. It's very tricky for teams when you can see people are off doing their own thing and you don't have that same cohesion.
It seems that if you have a bit of momentum in terms of wins, that this is something that might carry you a little bit further than if you have a series of disappointments. How important is momentum?
Certainly, it's a big part of. I mean, winning a race like the Tour de France. It's not possible for me just to show up in July in fantastic condition and take on the Tour de France. I think it is critical for me to win at least one or two, even if they're smaller events, before the Tour de France, just to build that momentum, to build the trust among my colleagues, my teammates, so that I really do have the buy-in 100% from everyone going into the Tour de France, that they know that if they give it their all, that I'm going to be just as up for it, and I'm going to give it absolutely everything to try and finish off the job for them.
Let's talk a little bit about technology in sport, because a lot of people in this room might be looking at what they're doing in their own business, but in sport, it seems to be an industry where there's been sustained growth, sustained profitability for so long, yet maybe not a huge amount of innovation. How much have you seen technology evolve in the time that you've been riding?
I think cycling in specific is quite a complicated sport in that sense. It really does have very traditional a very traditional background, a very traditional history, and I think there are quite a lot of people out there in the sport who actually don't want to see the sport evolving too much. They quite like the old traditions, and so that certainly has been quite a big hurdle in cycling specifically. But we are seeing a lot more use of data in training, especially data. The gearing now on our bikes has now electronic, opposed to the old manual cabling shifting systems. I think where the biggest innovations in the sport going forward will probably be much more in terms of broadcasting and turning a little bit more towards Formula One in terms of sharing data with our audiences, and maybe being able to pick up on our race radio communications between the director sportive vehicle behind us and the riders, and between the riders. I mean, that would be fascinating for people to be able to pick up on and to be able to share in that experience.
Indeed, we've seen something similar even in motor racing. So it's fair to say you think the industry could be ripe for a bit of disruption.
Certainly. I think it's a huge opportunity, and I think over the next decade we're going to see some great advances, hopefully, in that regard.
You mentioned the delicate balance, though, with technology getting involved in sport. Now, Team Sky is known to take great stock in numbers, thresholds, the science of cycling. The sport has gone just a little bit techie from the back office. How much of this detracts away from the raw experience of just getting on a bike and going for a ride?
I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, that's what I fell in love with the sport for, is just being able to get on the bike and go for a ride, and that feeling of independence, and just being able to really engage with your body and the outdoors. And still, for me, that hasn't changed. I mean, it has become now a lot more measured, calculated. I mean, when I'm preparing for the Tour de France, I'm going out and I'm doing specific efforts at certain power wattages, really measuring the efforts, and it does take a little bit away from that old feeling of just getting on your bike and riding. But at the same time, I genuinely love what I'm doing and feel very privileged to be able to do it professionally.
There is another aspect to technology in sport, and that is in gathering and interpreting information that you're providing, because doping has been such a big issue in cycling. How successful do you think technology will be to stop and identify those who might be cheating in the sport?
Certainly, I think the anti-doping, I mean, it's been a massive part of the evolution of the sport over the past 10 years. I mean, especially moving on from the whole Lance Armstrong era, where we all know what was happening back then. I think the anti-doping agencies have really stepped up their game. I'd like to think they've got a lot of new testing procedures in place. I really do think the sport has led the way now for even other sports to adapt. I think there's the World Anti-Doping Agency, WADA, who have a set of rules, and the introduction of the biological passport has been a new thing in 2009. I think that's helped clean up the sport in a huge way. But on top of that, the UCI, the governing body of cycling, has come in and introduced even more measures. We're now the only sport to have 24-hour testing, so they could come and wake us up at 2 o'clock in the morning, 365 days a year. And also a no needles policy. So they've gone above and beyond to try and get rid of, obviously, doping within the sport.
I thought it was just television and news anchors who had such an early start, but that seems to beat my start time. Let me ask you about what you're doing as an adrenaline junkie, because you've been filmed jumping out of planes, doing all kinds of stunts. Any more daredevil feats on the horizon for you?
Well, it's pretty difficult for me now. With the team contracts, I'm pretty limited as to what I'm allowed to do. So no more jumping out of planes or anything like that. But I must admit, a couple of weeks ago, I did go up in a little glider and do a bit of acrobatics, and I love it. I love the outdoors. I love experiencing life in that way.
Let's get one for the retail cyclist, because I'm not sure many people are going to ask you to go for a cycle with them, but like you turn to a friend and say, do you want to go for a jog? But when you're going to go and get a bike, what are you looking for? Any advice on how to buy the best road bike?
Yeah, I mean, any advice I'd give anyone, certainly on an amateur level, is just to enjoy it. Concentrate less on looking the part than being the part. I think there are a lot of people out there with equipment far superior to the equipment we're racing on. But remember why you got into the sport in the first place, which is the love of the sport, and enjoy it.
We'll close it out on that note. Thank you very much for sharing all your insights on motivation, endurance, teamwork, and what to look forward to. Chris Froome, winner of Tour de France.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.